I stood in my bedroom doorway and froze. My father's wooden drawer, the one he never let anyone touch, was open. Papers were scattered across my bed, and my uncle was standing in the middle of my room, holding one of my father's folders in his hands. He looked up slowly, not startled, not ashamed, just calculating. The afternoon light came through my window and hit his face at an angle that made him look like a stranger. Like someone I had never truly seen before. "What are you looking for?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Inside, my heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought he might hear it. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they have been caught but already have their escape plan ready. "I was just checking something for your mother," he said. He placed the folder back on the pile like nothing had happened. Like he belonged there. Like he had every right to be touching my dead father's private things. My heart dropped into my stomach. And that was the moment I knew something was very wrong. "My name is Emily. I am 17 years old. Before everything changed, I used to think the worst thing that could happen to me was failing my final exams or having my phone taken away. I used to worry about things like whether the boy I liked would notice me or whether my best friend was mad about something I said. Small things, normal things. I was wrong. 2 weeks before that moment in my bedroom doorway, my father had been buried under a gray city sky. The rain held off that day, but the clouds hung low and heavy like they were mourning too. My mother held my hand so tightly during the funeral that I thought my fingers would break. She did not cry at the grave. She waited until we got home, until the door closed behind us, and then she collapsed onto the sofa and wept for 3 hours straight. I remember sitting beside her, not knowing what to do. I made tea that went cold. I brought tissues that she did not use. I just sat there and watched my mother fall apart and felt completely useless. Our home used to feel warm. My father was the kind of man who whistled while making tea. Who left his shoes by the door in the exact same spot every night. Who kissed my forehead before bed even though I was too old for it. He worked long hours at his job, but he always made time for me. On weekends, he would take me to the park and we would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. He taught me how to ride a bicycle, how to change a tire, how to look people in the eye when I spoke to them. After he passed, the house felt hollow. The silence was different now. It pressed against my ears. Every sound seemed too loud and too quiet at the same time. The clock ticked differently. The floorboards creaked like they were complaining. Even the light seemed dimmer, like the windows were grieving too. And into that silence, my uncle stepped. His name is Uncle William. My father's younger brother. They were nothing alike. My father was steady, quiet, dependable. Uncle William was charming, talkative, always smiling. Where my father worked the same job for 20 years, Uncle William had a dozen different businesses that never seemed to last. Where my father saved money carefully, Uncle William spent freely and borrowed often. I had never thought much about these differences before. He was just my uncle. The one who showed up at holidays with gifts and loud laughter. The one who told funny stories and made my mother roll her eyes. He arrived at our door 3 days after the funeral with bags of groceries and a face full of sympathy. He hugged my mother for a long time. He patted my shoulder and said, "I'm here for you girls now." At first, it was comforting. He paid a few bills that my mother was too overwhelmed to handle. He sat at our dining table for hours, going through papers, muttering about handling the paperwork, and making sure everything is sorted. He took phone calls from people my father had owed money to or done business with. He handled things we did not even know needed handling. My mother trusted him completely. "He's your father's blood," she would say softly whenever she caught me watching him too closely. Family takes care of family. I wanted to trust him too. I really did. I wanted to believe that he was just being a good brother, a good uncle, stepping up when we needed someone most. I told myself that my suspicion was just grief making me paranoid. That I was looking for someone to blame because I could not accept that my father was really gone. But that open drawer would not leave my mind. Every night before sleep, I saw him standing there, holding that folder, smiling that smile. 3 days after I caught him in my room, I returned from the market. My mother had sent me to buy vegetables for dinner. She gave me a list written in her shaky handwriting and enough money folded into my palm. I was gone for maybe 45 minutes. The market was crowded that day, and I had to wait in line at the pepper seller's stall. When I came back, I climbed the stairs to our second-floor apartment, unlocked the door, and walked inside. Something felt different immediately. I stood in the hallway and listened. The apartment was silent. My mother was at her afternoon prayer group. She went every Wednesday without fail. She would not be back for another hour. I walked to my room and pushed the door open. Everything looked normal at first. My bed was made. My books were stacked. My school uniform hung on the back of the door where I always left it. But then my eyes landed on my wardrobe. The door was slightly open. Not wide, just a crack, just enough for someone to slip their fingers inside. My heart started beating faster. I crossed the room and pulled the wardrobe door fully open. I reached behind the winter clothes stuffed at the back. My fingers found the small envelope my father had tucked there years ago. I had discovered it by accident once and never told anyone. Inside were old photographs of my parents when they were young. Nothing valuable, nothing secret, just memories he had wanted to keep safe. I pulled it out and examined it. The envelope had been moved. I could tell because I always kept it facing a certain way. The photographs were in a specific order that I remembered. Now they were turned sideways. One was upside down, not taken, just moved, and somehow, that frightened me more than if it had been stolen. Once I knew what to look for, I started seeing the pattern everywhere. Uncle William always came by when my mother was away. He had learned her schedule somehow. He knew when she went to the pharmacy on Tuesday mornings. He knew when she visited her friend Mrs. Anderson on Thursday afternoons. He knew when her prayer group met on Wednesdays and when she did her grocery shopping on Fridays. He never entered my room when I was home. At least, not while I was awake. But things kept shifting. My books would be in a different order on my shelf. A file on my desk would be slightly bent, like someone had picked it up and put it back wrong. The dust on a box I kept under my bed would be disturbed, even though I had not touched that box in months. My mother's room showed similar signs. She did not notice because she was too deep in grief. She would find her jewelry box slightly open and think she had left it that way. She would find drawers not fully closed and blame her own forgetfulness. But I noticed everything now. He was searching. That much became clear. But for what? What did he think my father had hidden? What did he want so badly that he would sneak into his dead brother's home and rifle through his niece's things? Money? Documents? Something more valuable? I did not know yet. But I was going to find out. I started keeping a notebook. Hidden under my mattress where no one would think to look. I wrote down every date and time I noticed something out of place. I recorded every visit Uncle William made and how long he stayed. I noted what my mother told me about their conversations and what questions he asked. Patterns emerged quickly. He always asked about the house, about ownership papers, about whether my father had ever mentioned a will, about banks and safety deposit boxes and lawyers. He never asked about us. Not really, not the way someone who cared would ask. The question came at dinner, 8 days after I caught him in my room. We were eating together at the dining table. My mother had made jollof rice, my father's favorite. The smell usually filled the house with warmth, but that evening it just made me sad. There was an empty chair where he used to sit. None of us mentioned it. Uncle William was talking about nothing important, something about a neighbor's car breaking down, when he suddenly changed the subject. "Did your father ever mention property papers to you?" he asked casually. Too casually, like he was asking about the weather. "Maybe he gave something to you for safekeeping? A folder? An envelope?" My fork paused mid-air. I looked at him across the table. He was watching me with those calculating eyes I had seen in my bedroom. Waiting for my answer. Weighing my reaction. "No," I said. I kept my face blank. I kept my voice flat. I gave him nothing. His eyes lingered on me for a moment too long. Then he smiled that smile again and went back to eating. My mother did not notice anything. She was too lost in her own sadness, pushing rice around her plate without really eating. But I noticed, and I knew he was not done. Later that night, lying in bed, I replayed that moment over and over. The way he had asked. The way he had watched me. He was testing something, seeing if I knew anything, seeing if I would react. I had not reacted, but would that be enough? Or would he just try harder now? Mrs. Harper from downstairs stopped me on the staircase the next afternoon. She was our neighbor from the ground floor, a widow in her 60s with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. She missed nothing that happened in our building. If someone came home late or left early, she knew. If deliveries arrived or strangers visited, she noticed. She had lived in that apartment for 30 years and considered herself the unofficial guardian of the building. "Emily," she called out. Wait, I need to tell you something. I stopped on the stairs and turned to face her. She looked around to make sure no one else was listening. Then she lowered her voice. I saw your uncle yesterday, she said. He used his own key to enter your house. I was sweeping my porch and I saw him clearly. He let himself in like he lived there. My stomach tightened into a knot. Are you sure? I asked. I am sure, she said firmly. I know what I saw. And I know your mother was at the market at that time. I saw her leave around 10 in the morning. She had her shopping bags with her. Your uncle arrived maybe 20 minutes later. He went straight to your door, pulled out a key, and walked right in. I thanked her and continued up the stairs, my mind racing. We had never given him a key. So how did he get one? That evening, I waited until my mother was asleep. The apartment grew quiet around midnight. I could hear the distant sound of traffic and the occasional dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood. My mother's breathing from her room was deep and steady. She had started taking sleeping pills after the funeral, and they knocked her out completely. I crept into the kitchen and opened the small drawer by the window. The one where we kept the spare keys. I knew exactly what I would find before I even looked. The spare key to our front door was gone. I stood there in the dark kitchen, staring into the empty drawer, and felt a cold anger settle into my bones. He had taken it, probably copied it the first week he started coming around. Probably when my mother was too grief-stricken to notice anything. Probably while she was crying in the living room and he was helping in the kitchen. I did not confront him. I did not tell my mother yet. Instead, the next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a new lock. A strong one with a deadbolt that could not be picked or slipped. I installed it myself while my mother was at work. It took me 2 hours and I skinned my knuckles twice, but I got it done. I made 3 keys, one for her, one for me, one hidden in a place only I knew, taped to the back of the refrigerator where no one would think to look. I did not tell anyone what I had done. And I waited. 2 nights later, it happened. I was lying in bed, not quite asleep, when I heard it. A soft sound at the front door. Metal scraping against metal. The sound of a key sliding into a lock. I held my breath and listened. The scraping stopped. There was a pause. Then the sound came again, slightly more insistent this time. The key was going in, but it was not turning. The lock was different now. The key did not fit. Then silence. I lay frozen in my bed, staring at my ceiling, listening to the silence on the other side of the door. I knew who it was. I knew he was standing out there in the dark hallway, confused, frustrated, realizing that his key no longer worked. I imagined him checking the key against the lock, trying again, failing again. I imagined the expression on his face, that calculating look replaced by something darker. After a long moment, I heard footsteps retreating down the stairs. He was testing the old key. He had come back in the middle of the night to search again. And now he knew that I knew. The next morning, I told my mother I wanted to clean my father's study. She looked at me with tired eyes and nodded. That would be good, she said softly. I have not been able to go in there. The study was a small room off the living room. My father's desk still sat against the wall. His books still lined the shelves. His reading glasses still rested on the windowsill like he might walk in any moment and pick them up. A half-empty cup sat on the desk, the tea inside long since dried to a dark stain. I started with the books. One by one, I took them down, flipped through the pages, and put them back. I was not sure what I was looking for. But after everything that had happened, I knew my father had left something behind. Something Uncle William wanted, something important enough to risk everything for. The first shelf held law books from when my father had briefly studied to be a paralegal. Nothing between the pages. The second shelf held novels. African writers mostly. Things he had read for pleasure. Nothing. The third shelf held old textbooks and reference books. Dusty. Unopened for years. I found it in the third row, tucked between 2 books I had never seen him read. An old novel with a faded cover. When I opened it, a folded document fell out. Yellowed paper. Official stamps. I unfolded it carefully and started to read. It was not a full deed. But it referenced a notarized will stored with a lawyer named Mr. Taylor. The house was mentioned, and my uncle's name was not. While I searched, Uncle William was turning up the pressure on my mother. I heard him talking to her in the living room when he thought I was in my room studying. I stood behind the door and listened. You shouldn't handle property matters alone, he was saying. His voice was smooth, reasonable, and helpful. It is complicated. There are forms to file. Deadlines to meet. You are grieving. You need someone to handle these things for you. My mother murmured something I could not hear. Just sign temporary management rights to me, Uncle William said. It is only for a short time. Until everything is settled. Then you do not have to worry about any of it. I pressed my ear closer to the door. My mother spoke again, louder this time. I do not know. I should think about it. There was a pause. Then Uncle William's voice came again, slightly harder now. What is there to think about? I am your brother-in-law. I am trying to help you. The government has deadlines. There are tax implications. If you miss the filing window, you could lose everything. When I peeked through the crack in the door, I saw my mother's face. For the first time since the funeral, I saw doubt flicker across her features. She was not sure anymore. She was confused and scared and overwhelmed. And that frightened me more than anything. Because I knew that confusion was exactly what he was counting on. The next day, I took the folded document and went to the address listed on it. It was a small legal office above a pharmacy in the older part of town. The stairs were narrow and creaked under my feet. The walls needed painting and the light fixtures flickered. At the top, a glass door opened into a waiting room with plastic chairs and old magazines from 2 years ago. An older receptionist sat behind a desk. She had gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. She was reading a novel and looked up when I walked in. I gave her my father's name. She looked at me for a moment, then typed something into an ancient computer. She scrolled. She frowned. She scrolled again. Then her face changed. She looked up at me sharply. You are his daughter? Yes, I said. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she stood up without another word and disappeared through a door at the back of the office. I sat there in the small waiting room, my heart pounding, staring at the door she had vanished through. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second felt like an hour. I counted them. 60, 120, 180. Finally, the door opened again. The receptionist came out, followed by an older man in a traditional agbada. He carried a sealed envelope in his hand. Come with me, please, he said. His name was Mr. Taylor. He led me into his office and closed the door behind us. The room was small and cluttered. Files stacked everywhere, papers covering the desk, sticky notes on the walls. But in the middle of all that chaos, the sealed envelope in his hand looked official and important. It was thick and cream-colored, with my father's name written across the front in his own handwriting. He sat down across from me and placed the envelope on the desk between us. Your father came to see me 6 months ago, he said quietly. He told me he was not feeling well. He wanted to make sure everything was in order. Just in case. I swallowed hard. 6 months ago. That meant my father had known something was wrong. He had made plans while smiling at us, while whistling in the kitchen, while acting like everything was normal. He had known he was sick and had said nothing. This envelope, Mr. Taylor continued, was to be released only under one condition. If there was pressure regarding the property. If anyone tried to force your mother into signing something. My chest tightened. He told me you would come, the lawyer said softly. He said you were smart. That you would figure it out. He said you noticed things other people missed. I blinked back tears. My father had expected this. He had known his brother. He had known what would happen after he was gone. He had prepared. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a formal will. Legal stamps. Signatures. Everything official and binding. I read it slowly, carefully, making sure I understood every word. The house legally belonged to my mother. That much I knew already. But there was more. There was a clause. I read it 3 times to make sure I was not imagining it. If any relative attempted fraudulent transfer of the property, if anyone tried to trick my mother into signing it away, then full ownership would immediately transfer to me. Not to my mother. To me, his daughter. My father had known. He had known that his brother might try something. He had known that my mother, in her grief, might be vulnerable. He had built a wall around us that would only appear when someone tried to break through. I looked up at Mr. Taylor. He knew, I whispered. The lawyer nodded slowly. He knew. And he trusted you to handle it when the time came. I sat there for a long moment, holding the will, feeling my father's presence in the room with me. He had been gone for weeks, but in that moment, he felt closer than he had since the funeral. 2 days later, Uncle William made his move. He came to our house in the evening, carrying a folder of papers. He sat at our dining table across from my mother and spread them out like he was doing her a favor. These are just formalities, he said smoothly. Standard documents. You sign here, here, and here. Then I can handle everything for you. You do not need to worry about property taxes or maintenance or any of it. I will take care of everything. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched. My mother picked up the first paper. She squinted at it. She was not a woman who understood legal documents. She trusted people. That was her nature. That was what my father had always loved about her. I moved closer and looked over her shoulder. There it was, right at the top. I saw it instantly. Transfer draft. It was not a management agreement. It was a transfer of ownership. He was trying to get her to sign the house over to him disguised as something else. The language was technical, buried in paragraphs of legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. My mother looked up at me. She did not understand what she was holding. But I did, and Uncle William, watching me from across the table, knew that I did. I waited until Uncle William left that night. He stayed for another hour, making small talk, pretending everything was normal. My mother offered him tea. He accepted. They sat in the living room discussing nothing important while I sat in my room, clutching the will my father had left, counting the minutes until he would finally go. When the door finally closed behind him, I waited another 30 minutes to be sure he would not come back. Then I sat my mother down at the kitchen table and told her everything. I told her about catching him in my room. I told her about the moved envelope in my wardrobe. I told her about Mrs. Harper seeing him use a key. I told her about the missing spare key and the new lock I had installed. I told her about the failed entry in the middle of the night. She listened without interrupting. Her face grew paler with each word. Then I told her about Mr. Taylor. About the sealed envelope. About the will. About the clause my father had written to protect us. When I finished, my mother sat in silence for a long time. Then she cried, not the loud weeping of the funeral. Quiet tears that ran down her cheeks while she stared at the wall. Tears of grief and betrayal and something else. Relief, maybe, that she had not been alone in her suspicion. That someone had been watching. That my father had not left us completely unprotected. Finally, she wiped her face and looked at me. What do we do now? She asked. I told her my plan. We agreed to meet him publicly. My mother called Uncle William the next morning and told him she wanted to discuss the documents. She said she had questions and wanted to go over everything one more time. She suggested the building's small meeting hall downstairs so neighbors could use the play area while we talked. It sounded innocent. It sounded like she was finally ready to sign. He agreed immediately, too eagerly. He thinks he has won, I told my mother. He thinks you are going to sign. She nodded grimly. He is wrong. While my mother made the call, I contacted Mr. Taylor. He confirmed he would be there. Then I went downstairs and spoke to Mrs. Harper. I asked her to spread the word quietly. To have neighbors present, to make sure there were witnesses. She nodded with a fierce look in her eyes and promised to handle it. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. 3 days to wait. 3 days of pretending everything was normal while Uncle William came and went, smiling his calculating smile, thinking he was about to get everything he wanted. 3 days of my mother looking at him across the dinner table with new eyes. Seeing him for what he really was. Saturday arrived gray and overcast. I woke early that morning and could not go back to sleep. I lay in bed watching the light slowly fill my room, thinking about my father, thinking about what we were about to do. My stomach churned with nerves. What if something went wrong? What if Uncle William found a way to talk his way out of it? What if the neighbors did not show up? But when I walked into the kitchen, my mother was already there, dressed and ready. She looked at me with calm eyes and squeezed my hand. Whatever happens today, she said quietly, I am proud of you. We gathered in the building's small meeting hall at 3 o'clock. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh white light on the long table and plastic chairs. Slowly, neighbors filtered in. Mrs. Harper came first, then Mr. and Mrs. Anderson from the third floor, then the young couple from across the hall, then more. By the time the clock reached 3, at least 15 neighbors filled the plastic chairs along the walls. By the time Uncle William walked in, at least 15 neighbors filled the plastic chairs along the walls. He stopped in the doorway when he saw them. For just a second, his confident expression flickered. He looked around the room, taking in all the faces, all the witnesses. Then his smile returned, but it was tighter now. Forced. What is all this? He asked lightly. I thought we were just signing papers. My mother sat at the table. She did not smile. Sit down, William, she said quietly. He sat, and the trap closed around him. Uncle William placed the forged documents on the table. He spread them out with the same smooth movements he always used. The transfer draft sat on top, waiting for my mother's signature. He pushed it toward her and slid a pen across the table. "See," he said, "everything is ready. You just sign here." My mother did not touch the pen. Instead, the door at the back of the hall opened and Mr. Taylor walked in. He was dressed in a formal black agbada and carried a leather briefcase. He walked slowly to the front of the room and stood beside my mother. Uncle William's face changed. "Who is this?" he asked. His voice was sharper now. "Why is he here?" Mr. Taylor opened his briefcase and removed the original will. He placed it on the table beside the forged documents. "That document you are holding," the lawyer said calmly, "is void." Silence swallowed the room. Uncle William stared at the will like it was a ghost. Mr. Taylor picked up the will and held it so everyone could see. "This is the original last will and testament of the late Mr. Harris," he announced. "It was filed with my office 6 months before his passing. It has been sealed and waiting for this exact moment." He opened it to the relevant page. "There is a clause here," he continued. "If any relative attempts fraudulent transfer of the property, if anyone tries to trick the widow into signing away her home, then full ownership immediately transfers to his daughter, Emily." Gasps rippled across the hall. I stood beside my mother and watched my uncle's face drain of color. The confident mask was gone now. Beneath it was something ugly. Something desperate. Something I had never seen before. "That is not real," he said. His voice cracked. "That is a forgery." Mr. Taylor shook his head slowly. "It is notarized. It is registered. It is very, very real." The room buzzed with whispers. Uncle William looked around at all the faces staring at him. Judgment in every pair of eyes. Mrs. Harper stood up from her plastic chair. "I saw him," she said loudly. "I saw him using a key to enter their home when the mother was away. I reported it to Emily weeks ago." Another neighbor stood. "The young man from across the hall. I saw him photographing documents from their mailbox," he said. 2 weeks ago. I was coming home late and saw him standing there with his phone out, taking pictures of envelopes." A third voice. Then a fourth. Each accusation landed like a blow. Uncle William shrank in his chair. The confident man who had brought groceries and paid bills was gone. In his place sat a trapped animal looking for an escape. Mr. Taylor spoke again. "Forgery investigation will begin Monday," he said calmly. "Attempted property fraud carries serious penalties. Criminal implications. Prison time, possibly." Uncle William's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "It was a misunderstanding," he pleaded. "I was only trying to help. I did not understand the documents. I thought I was doing the right thing." But no one believed him now. The room had turned against him completely. He made one final attempt. He turned to my mother, his eyes wet with something that might have been real tears or might have been more performance. "It was impossible to tell anymore. After everything I did for you," he said. "After all the help I gave, the groceries, the bills I paid, the hours I spent going through paperwork so you would not have to. This is how you repay me?" My mother stood up slowly. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had sat at her table, who had called himself family, who had smiled while planning to take her home. "For us?" she asked quietly. "Or for the house?" He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. "Everything you did," my mother continued, "every visit, every meal, every kind word, it was all leading to this moment. To this table, to these papers. You were never helping us. You were waiting for your chance." Uncle William's face crumpled. That was the last time he spoke in that room. The legal transfer happened 3 days later. Because of the attempted fraud clause in my father's will, ownership transferred officially to me. Not to my mother. To me, his daughter. The lawyer explained it carefully at the signing. "It is not punishment," Mr. Taylor said. "It is protection. Your father wanted to make sure that if someone tried to take advantage of your mother's grief, the property would go to someone younger. Someone harder to trick. Someone he trusted to protect the family." My mother sat beside me and held my hand the way she had at the funeral. But this time, her grip was not desperate. It was proud. The documents were signed, stamped, made official. For the first time since my father's funeral, I felt steady. Like the ground beneath my feet was solid again. Like the hollow feeling in our home might finally start to fill. I was 17 years old. And I owned my family's home. Weeks passed. The house changed slowly. Not the walls or the furniture, but the feeling inside. The silence stopped pressing against my ears. The hollow emptiness began to fill with something warmer. My mother started cooking again. Real meals, not just things thrown together because we had to eat. She started smiling again. Small smiles at first, then bigger ones. One afternoon, I walked into my bedroom and stood by the window. The same drawer sat in the same spot. Closed now, untouched. I ran my fingers over the wood my father had touched so many times. Neighbors greeted us differently now when we passed them on the stairs. Not with pity, the way they had right after the funeral. With respect, with something like admiration. They stopped to talk to my mother, to ask how she was doing, to share stories about my father. Mrs. Harper stopped me one day and squeezed my hand. "Your father would be proud," she said. That evening, my mother hugged me in the kitchen while dinner cooked. She whispered into my hair the way she used to when I was small. "Your father knew you would protect us," she said. "He always said you were the strong one." I did not understand until now. I closed my eyes and held on to her. The house felt warm again. My uncle lost everything. His reputation in the community crumbled. Our neighbors did not trust him anymore. His friends heard what he had tried to do. The legal investigation continued for months. In the end, he avoided prison but carried a record that followed him everywhere. He moved away eventually, to another city where no one knew what he had done. I heard rumors sometimes, but I never saw him again. But what stayed with me was not his downfall. It was what I learned about myself. Kindness is not weakness. My mother taught me that. She trusted him because that was who she was. There was no shame in her trust, only in the person who betrayed it. She taught me that being open and loving does not make you foolish. It makes you human. Patience is not silence. I waited. I watched. I gathered proof. I did not scream or accuse without evidence. I prepared. I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment. And truth, when protected carefully, always finds its moment. My father knew that. He prepared too. He built walls we could not see until we needed them. If you were in my place, would you have reacted immediately? Or would you have waited for the right time? I waited, and the truth found its moment.